We're good to go. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm Teal. I'm an intern here at Rochambeau. I'm a URI student right now. And yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about AI, and more so from the point of view of like recognizing AI rather than like using it to create things. That's much more so kind of the intention here. So kind of the framework we're using is something that we generally refer to as media literacy, which is more or less understanding when media is credible or not, or how it may or may not be credible in different ways. So that's kind of the general framework that we're approaching it today. So we're going to start kind of talking about what AI itself actually is. And it, as most of us anyway, if not all of us know, it stands for artificial intelligence, but it refers to different things. But in short, it's when computers display or seem to display some sort of ability to think that is reminiscent to that of a human. Before generative AI existed, which is mostly what we'll be focusing, and I'll define that a little bit better in a moment too. AI mostly was used to predict outcomes from like particular data sets. One example is kind of like looking at x-rays and predicting when an x-ray shows something cancerous in it, basically by understanding what the existing data sets look like on that and being able to predict the direction based on what's being seen and what has been seen. It's more efficient than humans to do it with a large amount of data, and that's kind of where it's most useful, at least in that situation anyway. Just making sure where. Generative AI itself, rather than what we've talked about already with AI, looks to generate new data that is basically mimicking in some way that which it's trained on. Adam Zhu of MIT describes AI, generative AI, as a system that learns to generate more objects that look like the data it was trained on. So it's not really creating anything new. It's just influence from what it's seen and what prompts you put into it. And to kind of talk about that a little bit, a lot of us have heard of like some of the most common generative AI tools like ChatGPT, Microsoft Copilot, Midjourney, DALL-E, Stable Diffusion, Google Gemini, and there are a lot of others propping up. Increasingly, Microsoft Copilot is a good example. It's getting like embedded in other tools that we've already been using. There's kind of a lot of aspects to it that we'll look at some of. But that's kind of where generative AI comes from in any case. And this can be important in that generative AI specifically is being used to make images, articles, and videos that can be used to spread misinformation, which is incorrect information that is intentionally meant to be misleading or persuasive in some way. Oftentimes talked about in the context of politics. There was a lot of discussion of misinformation around the COVID pandemic, as politics and public health are kind of the hot points of it recently anyway. The image that is up there right now was created on Midjourney, which is a generative AI tool, and it purports to represent a earthquake in 2001 in Oregon that never actually existed. But if you didn't already know that, or look really closely at the photo, it's pretty convincing, and you could be like, I didn't know there was an earthquake in 2001 in Oregon. Like, what's up with that? And some of the things, and we'll kind of be getting into this too, but if you look closely at some of the figures, especially the background figures, a lot of them are a little blurred. The little girl who's the second person in has, was that 6 or 7 fingers there? The counting the fingers is like a common tool. Generative AI, especially the more publicly available, not quite as sophisticated systems of it, are bad at getting that type of detail. They get something that looks plausible like a human hand, but it's not quite there. And then kind of following the reasons of importance, so like being able to identify when it's being used for misinformation. Like sometimes it can just be made to make a meme, or it's funny, or whatever. But other times there can be something a little more behind it. And there's also a factor where there's not typically much transparency on licensing, on where the companies are sourcing that information, and especially comes into an issue with things like copyright and other intellectual property laws and protections, where there's an issue where typically like original artists or institutions are not getting compensated, they're not getting credit for it. And that's the source for kind of a lot of the, some of the current controversy. I've been hearing a lot in the last like few days and week about the Japanese movie studios, Studio Ghibli, having a lot of their like art style being ripped without any licensing, copyright, acknowledgement, or anything like that from the original material. And it's something that also has a big impact on small artists as well, but especially in that like lack of transparency with sourcing is one of the issues around generative AI being shared and reproduced on a large scale. And we also see this kind of follows the information of misinformation, talking about deepfakes, which are not always made using AI, but with how widespread and easily accessed, like I can just log into Google Gemini and have it make pictures for me. Like anyone can do that. Usually all you need is to make a little account like everyone wants you to today. But deepfakes are easier to make on a bigger scale with generative AI tools, and that's kind of what's key here. A deepfake typically represents a person, oftentimes a politician or a celebrity, and it usually claims that that person is saying something when they actually aren't. The image there is not technically a deepfake, but I do have an example on the next slide. Typically, it's about spreading misinformation, about trying to influence attitudes a certain way or another, or potentially defamation. Those are kind of the common areas that we see deepfakes being used that are kind of especially problematic and really helpful to use some tools that we're talking about to try to identify when something is like that. So the example that I have of one is from the 2024 election primary season, where in New Hampshire, someone made a AI-generated audio of Joe Biden telling voters to not vote in the primary. Considering there are things that could have a bigger impact than that, But I think it's a little telling of how these tools could be used, and we're already seeing them used on a particular scale. We've had some issues with the audio on this, so I'm going to be playing it from here.
It's important that you save your vote for the November election. Voting this Tuesday only enables the Republicans in their quest to elect Donald Trump again.
Now that sounds like a plea from Joe Biden, except that it isn't. And now it's under investigation by the New Hampshire Attorney General.
So just a quick little example there of how, if you look for them, like they're kind of all over YouTube. Most of the time they're like, this is a deep fake, but not always in any case. And this was someone attained basically just phone numbers of registered Democrats in New Hampshire, which is something anyone with the money to do so can do, and send that robocall out to all of them. And just to kind of like encourage a little discussion here, what are some ways that you think that you all think generative AI could be used for misinformation, either using a deep fake or otherwise? Okay.
I'm literally just learning the definition of deepfake and this and that.
Sure.
Huddling along with the news, just saying, okay, that's a deepfake. Yeah, so I was interested when you first introduced us. I said, oh, what are the tools?
Yeah.
I just don't have a real idea.
Okay.
Framework to draw from.
Yeah. There are certain things like preparing for, like I personally avoid using AI for like anything. But preparing for this, I messed around with mostly Google Gemini because it's one of the more easily accessible ones. Like if you already have a Google account, you can just use it. And not all of them generate images, and Google Gemini does. And a couple things that I found was that they have some limiters in that, but less publicly available, more sophisticated systems don't have those same limiters. And that's something that there isn't really any like effective wide-scale regulation on or anything at this point. But it can be used, and there are examples from, I forget exactly which country, but in Eastern Europe where and I think also in India there are examples of this, where videos have spread of politicians saying things that they did not say that were made using generative AI. That did have some impact, alleged anyway, in those political situations. So.
I would imagine that it would be possible, as is being done, to populate dating apps,
Yeah.
social media accounts
Mm-hmm.
with AI-made people that can bring solace and comfort to some people, but be completely misleading and then potentially be used to empty their pockets.
Yeah. Yeah. There are a lot of scams going around on almost every platform, it seems. And with how sophisticated some AI tools are getting, I can definitely see how it could be used to use some of those to mislead someone in that situation. But yeah, let's move on. So we're going to talk a little bit more about how to actually recognize when something is generated with AI. So we've talked a little bit about what it is. So we're going to kind of get into that here. So we've talked a little bit about, so with the image of the supposed earthquake, that there are often like inconsistencies of sorts. But it can be things like inconsistent textures, which can mean a few different things. So like in the Joe Biden recording, it sounded a lot like him. But if you listen closely, there's something a little off that it didn't quite get in terms of the tone, almost like it felt almost tin-y to me. But it can also be really difficult. So we'll kind of continue with that. And something I'd like to do as we get a little further is go back through. So most of the images here are AI generated. And we'll go back when we get a little further forward. But also a lot of these things, those inconsistencies, the body parts looking a little implausible is kind of probably the best way of putting it, is not always reliable. Sometimes you see something like an image that looks like it's a Van Gogh of New York, and you're like, he wouldn't have seen New York like that. So there are other tools we can do that kind of come from the framework of media literacy that we're going to get into a little bit. The kind of main thing we're going to talk about is the SIFT method, which is a 4-step, I find somewhat easy to remember, kind of way of looking at things to, well, I'll talk about it a little bit more. If you see anything and you're not sure the source of it, if you see that it comes from a page on Facebook that you're not familiar with, sometimes it can be tough to track where that original source is, but that's kind of the key of stopping and then investigating a little bit more. It's something if you know the source, you can still follow a lot of these steps to kind of do some verification. If you're reading a news article that seems a little off, there are a couple of steps in this that are going to be helpful as well. But after stopping to kind of pause on interacting with something, especially sharing it, especially spreading anything, then the next stop is to investigate, which is more or less using a general knowledge resource like Google or Wikipedia, just putting in the name of that original or as original as you can find source material to find basic info. I use Midjourney, so like if you see someone share something, share a picture online, and you see that it originally came from something called Midjourney, you can just Google Midjourney, and this is part of the result, where you can see that it's a generative AI program. And sometimes people just draw something or share something they think looks cool. But if there's something that especially has sort of a reaction, especially if it's information that can be impact like politics, health, cultural kind of mores or behaviors and attitudes, getting an idea of what those established kind of general knowledge systems say about it can be a good start. Sometimes this step it's either not going to be easy to find, or it won't give you enough info to kind of decide if that source is going to be credible, if it's good to use, if it's worth sharing or not, or if you need to say to someone, hey, I don't think that's a good thing to be sharing because it comes from, it's made by generative AI and it's not credible. out of that. The next step, so we have SIFT. The F stands for find, and it is basically, so find is finding another resource that you are familiar with, that you know to be reputable, and see what they're saying about it, especially if it's a article from a source you don't know, if it's an image from a source you don't know, and can't find enough info about through the investigate step. You can see where else that image has been published, see what context it's been published in, and see how that lines up with what you were seeing otherwise. It is interesting also to just see how even like different news articles cover the same topic. And this can be useful a little bit beyond talking about AI too. And if finding those other resources isn't enough, or if you're not able to find other resources, especially with photos, that should be a red flag to question the credibility. At the very least, to question it. But the next step of trace is finding the original content. This one has a lot of importance with especially like news articles and things like that written by generative AI. It's often the case with those that a lot of the citations, references, or quotes, things like that, don't actually exist, or they're very much so misrepresented as they come from the original source material. And by doing that, you should be able to get a little bit of a better idea if that source is credible or not in any case. Does anyone have any questions about the SIFT method?
Sure, a question about
Yeah.
the SIFT method that it could be applied. So I'm Googling certain, my kitty has an ear infection, and I'm Googling the things. I got some in my mouth. It's a silly little thing. And the first thing that comes up now in my Google searches are AI, right?
Yes.
So if it's medical, I'll put in like comma may appoint, like I'll try to
Mhm.
refine my search a little more. But in this case, I just, was generally looking. So I immediately, like, so this says generated by AI. I guess I could use it like I would a Wikipedia page years ago, that maybe there's a source that I could then research from that point forward.
Mhm.
Just generally, when when it says generated by AI, which is now comes up first on my Google search, which is just annoying because it's essentially just a lot more work than it used to be, is what it feels like.
Yeah.
Or, is that kind of, so that's sort of the SIFT method type of thing?
Yeah, so in terms of like seeing what those sources look like, because when you do that search and it has that little summary, that generated by AI summary, it tells you, at least on Google anyway, that I've seen, it tells you where it came from.
Okay.
And there's a little link image, and it will pull the website up. And something that I've found works well, because oftentimes those don't really understand, especially if it's a word that has a couple different meanings, or includes an acronym that can refer to a couple different things. I can find sometimes it gets it right, and sometimes it doesn't. But if you, and it also, I've seen, sometimes it does a good job at building a summary of what it's pulling from, and sometimes it gets things a little off. So I try to, anytime I use that feature, follow that link. And it will come up, there's a little box usually to the right on Google that has the article, the web page, whatever that information is coming from. And then I usually follow that and go to that web page. Hopefully the information is then easy to find in it. But that is something that's a good example of where you can use the SIFT method, especially if it's something you're like, I'm not sure if that's right. That's a great point to stop and then follow those steps from there. The good thing about, or helpful thing, I maybe should say, about that tool from Google is that it does link. You can go follow that source material. It is the case, so I have for an assignment used ChatGPT, and it does not link. You can ask it where it got the material from, and it will tell you something that you then need to kind of follow to see what that actually says. But AI is really good at getting plausible information that isn't always correct. In any case, but and with that tool from Google, I've seen, and it's something that it's also changing. Like every couple weeks, like I'm not searching on Google super often, or at least not in a sense where I'll see the generative AI or the AI assistant thing. But you can also kind of see it learning based on feedback, which is interesting anyway.
Also, if you type in your Google search and then you do your minus symbol, like whatever the search is minus AI, like all together, and it won't come up with the generative AI. So if you just didn't want to see it at all, and you could remember to put minus AI every time you
So
Google search.
literally like the plus minus and.
Yeah, the minus symbol AI, like all together in spaces, just after whatever your search is, and then it does AI. Apparently there's a way to turn it off completely, but somebody just told me about that, so I haven't done it yet.
I didn't know about that either, so
Yeah.
thank you. But yeah, and I've heard about ways to turn it off completely, and also have had trouble getting them to work
Yeah.
or continue to work. I think every time they update it, anyway.
What search engine are you using? You say you don't use Google often.
So
Is that?
yeah, honestly, with a lot of what, I don't search things on the internet very often. When I do, I use Google. And sometimes when I do and use Google, it's more specific or maybe less popular searches that they don't have the AI tool for. So I'm a full-time student, and almost all of my internet use is based around like that type of searching, and I usually do it from the URI libraries page, and it's looking for academic source materials and things like that. So yeah, I don't use Google that much anyway, but I do use it. I won't pretend that I don't use it at all. Yeah.
In that case with the summary that comes up, is that generative AI? Would you consider that generative?
I think, because I think so.
Isn't it just like pulling certain
Based on
bits from other sites?
a prompt. And if it doesn't always directly pull from it,
Oh, okay.
and it will try to, it will try to summarize it. And it doesn't always generate it successfully as part of the issue. Yeah, if that makes sense. Kind of the next thing I'm going to talk about is a reverse Google image search, which is, again, so like the SIFT method and it doesn't necessarily relate only to AI, but if you see an image especially that you're not sure, there's no implication, anything following the SIF method, you're not coming up with something decisive, but you're also a little hesitant about it for whatever reason. It kind of follows both the F and the T, the finding and the trace. It's a method for doing that. That's mostly specific to images, and it's something that can be really useful, especially if you just see something on Facebook or on social media. And it's easiest to do on a computer rather than on a phone, but you can do it on a phone a couple of ways. It's from Google Images, so you basically just go to images.google.com, or if you type in Google Images into whatever search bar, you will get there. The main page looks like that, and you're going to want to hit the photo image there, which is to search by image in any case. Doing that, you're able to take whatever the image you're seeing is and search for that specifically through Google Images, rather than like typing a description or keywords like that. This is an example. So some of the guidance I had on building this presentation came from a PC Mag article that we'll revisit in a minute too. But if you left click or hold a cursor on, you can typically copy the image address or image link, it'll say. And then on the Google image reverse image search, at the bottom where there's all of that URL garble there, if you paste that link into that and hit search, you'll conduct the reverse image search. And for that image specifically, which came from that PC Mag article, we can see that the only results coming up, especially if we focus to exact matches of it, are from PC Mag or like republications of that same article. I use that because it's something that image is, I know it's AI going into it. But if all you're finding are, if you're either not finding very much, it should be, or could be a red flag about it, using this. And not necessarily that it's even AI so much as also just not credible or not reliable is kind of the key thing there. And that's something we can do from here is kind of go back through and take a look at each of the images that I made using generative AI and included in here. But I also have some discussion questions that I kind of want to open up for everyone. So I'll go back through to those images and then come back to the discussion questions. And I think it's starting with the definitely real Subaru Baja here. This is, so I kind of have already given it up that I made these with Google Gemini. But at a first look of this picture, it looks pretty real. It looks like a small Subaru truck that's modern. The Subaru Baja was that little truck bed station wagon thing that they stopped making in like 2005. And people online always tell them that they should make it again. But a couple things on this image. Is there anything that any of you notice should be a red flag here?
The distortion of the image, it doesn't look quite right.
Yeah.
It looks longer, the bed looks longer, it just isn't, but I know what it looks like.
Yeah.
So I know that's a new car.
Yeah. Yeah.
or like natural.
Yeah. That's a good point. That's a good thing to pay attention to.
Finger.
Yeah.
I didn't know what this car was, so it's interesting that you say they stopped making it, because I wouldn't have known that's like not supposed to be a new looking car, because it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Like I wouldn't have had that background. That's awesome.
Yeah. When I was getting this image, I had to correct it a couple times. It gave me like one or two images that looked more fake. Basically, to me, it looks like they just took that the program took a something like a current Subaru front end and just added like a little flatbed to the back. The Subaru logo also is off.
For eyesight, so for me,
It's yeah, where it's really blurry, it's a little distorted. It looks, if you look at it quickly, it looks like a Subaru logo thing on the grill of the car. But yeah, so all kind of especially the distortion, the proportions not really looking right is a great thing to notice as a red flag here. And then this image we talked about a little bit already, but are there any other things that you all notice?
If it's a 9.1 magnitude earthquake, everybody is, like, they're not holding on to something.
Yeah.
Also, these days, like, supposedly happened in 2001, this doesn't look like a 2001, like, quality photo.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
yeah, the overall quality of the photo just doesn't look like
It's inconsistent in a certain sense, and that's something where to me anyway, the people in the foreground have like a level of detail, while then the people in the back like have none at all. And maybe like a experienced photographer with a decent camera can stage something like that, but a off-the-cuff image in a 9.1 magnitude earthquake is not gonna be able to set it up that way. If you look also closely at like some of the like body shapes of the people, like in general, people don't look like that. Bodies don't look like that. And it, like the especially ways that like people are turned in ways that aren't really plausible in a certain sense.
Various people are looking in different directions.
Yeah.
It's like,
The kid who's playing his toy, and they look like they're at an amusement park.
Yeah.
Well, yes, there are earthquakes.
I think I know West Coast, yes. I don't know how recently there has been. And I think a 9.1 magnitude, unless most of us would be aware of that having had happened.
So did it cause a little reaction on Reddit? Like, did people believe it?
So, yes. It's kind of one of the like War of the Worlds situations, with that as an example, where some people who had context, like this got posted originally on the Midjourney program, like subreddit, which is the generative AI tool used to make it. So people who were on the page because they were interested in Midjourney and generative AI tools would have expected or just assumed that that was made using generative AI. But people searching, I'm not sure what the hits came from, but if they were searching something like West Coast earthquakes and it directed them to that, which the internet could do for sure. Reddit's usually pretty high up in search results. So that's kind of the impression that I got when I was reading about this image and how it kind of spread. I think like the War of the Worlds recording analogy is probably a decent one. And then one of the interesting pictures here. So from this is a screenshot from a news article kind of about using generative AI tools to make fake political images. So you can see that it's a tweet about making an image using AI. But looking at the photos itself, what do we see? That could be a red flag if we were to not have the framing of it. Yeah, someone does. I think a couple people do.
He's not wearing his trademark red tie.
Which, I mean, that's a subtle thing and not the first thing I would have noticed. But yeah, yes.
Very, very
Yeah,
like real life doesn't look that picture perfect.
yeah.
How are you gonna get that in a photo without it being blurry or something? And the backgrounds are different for the shooting angles.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if those are two different photographers, they would have more simpler backgrounds.
Yeah.
But,
One of the things that I jumped out to me at first when I saw this is that everything looks plasticky. Like it almost looks like a very realistic action figure setup. Like everything's kind of glossy. We talked like a little bit about like the distortion or in like things just not quite looking right, but that almost like it looks more like a wax model with weird kind of image saturation of this happening rather than an actual image of it. But a lot of those are subtle. Like if you saw these quickly, otherwise they look pretty realistic. In any case.
You also don't have the Trump response to the photo, right? Like, you would put that too.
Demanding it to be taken
Or
down.
whatever,
Mm-hmm.
that he would respond to the photo himself.
And then so this one, I mean, so we talked about a little bit already the some aspects of it, of the textures not being quite right, and also that Van Gogh wouldn't have had this point of reference. Is there anything kind of missing from that you all see in this image?
I don't know if this is just the screen movement, but the bottom kind of looks like blurry in a way that the foreground.
Yeah.
Looks blurry in a way that the background is more clear, like aesthetically captured in art. That doesn't make sense.
Yeah, exactly. The perspective is where it's almost like the background does look more yeah.
I personally have a lot of friends who are artists, so
Mhm.
I would like to think about this in the context of art, but it feels more difficult than like a photo to like identify art.
Yes.
People who make things that are like more abstract.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the clues like the lens.
Yeah. And this is, so like I did talk a little bit about how it rips info from artists without good attribution. This is probably a good kind of basic, like high-level example of that, where there's no, in the image itself, there's no like credit, there's nothing going, I mean, Van Gogh's been dead for a long time, but there's no sort of transparency about where that came from. And when I was prompting Gemini to make this image, I did not specify Starry Night. I'm pretty sure so what would a Van Gogh painting of New York look like is what I put into the prompt, and it came up with this. So it knows enough in the database and whatever it has that it's kind of loading information from. It has that information already. How it got it, whether it got it on ethical, legal, copyright, following grounds is questionable. And a lot of the programs are just really not super transparent about that too.
It also, with perspective, so you have the Empire State Building, the Chrysler Building, and then the World Trade Center. They would, even if the World Trade Center, well, presumably Van Gogh painted it, would be standing, but it wouldn't be lined up like that.
Yeah.
The Trade Center would have been a little too big.
I don't know the New York style.
Because like, if it's a painting, then somebody could have chosen to make it inaccurate too.
Yeah.
I think they made the buildings like that if they were a real person.
Yeah, but then, if they were to do that, maybe there'd be a giveaway in the title or something.
Mm-hmm.
Van Gogh Dreams of New York.
And that's one of the,
Something that, where you'd be like, oh, that's kind of a surrealistic take.
yeah. And with the points of like art being maybe tougher than a photo in some ways to determine, where it can be tough to see where those liberties were taken from an artistic point of view rather than just being incorrect about something.
But yeah, to the point, like if this were a lesser known artist per se,
Mhm.
this is a Japanese artist, so I would have no idea if they, your friend's
Yeah.
art is superimposed right there, right? Like I would just, and without a lot of searching,
Mhm.
yeah, exactly, a lot of,
Yeah.
which there's a lot of that in life right now.
And then, so this is a screenshot, not something that I generated with AI, but it's from a CNN article where the authors of the article basically prompted for a CNN-style article about a topic. And this is where we see kind of the finding and tracing out of SIFT being important because there aren't really any other tells in text, in a text article. And the information highlighted is not correct information. So at the point that this was published, well, at this point still, I believe, but Jerome Powell is still the federal chair of the Reserve. And that was something that the AI tool felt was just plausible, given the articles that it pulled information from. Yeah, it is. Where a lot of the material just looks really realistic, in a sense, and we these steps help us be a little more careful with how we interact with it. And it's, if you were to then look up what the March 2023, I think, or 2, CPI index increased by, it was not 2.6. Off the top of my head, I don't remember what it was. But that was just, incorrect information that was put into this article. There's a practice from a lot of larger news organizations are using AI to generate articles, and authors are at a certain level, and depending on the company and institution, all that, they're going in and editing these inconsistencies. And that's something that if something gets missed, it may not be obvious to us. And that following those steps, getting information from multiple sources, and a lot of it isn't even exclusive to like generative AI things. It just, that kind of increases everything, where it makes those mistakes that can be reproduced and hard for us to notice if we're not careful. In any case, this is a fake stop sign. We don't have to go through every single one because I did put a lot in here. This is real. That's a real screenshot. Fake magnifying glass there. And then this one I do want to point out that it's a fake corkboard. The text in it is kind of something else I would point out here. And that it's not actual words. And it's something, if you look at it quickly, it looks like actual words, unless you try and actually read them. In any case. Have any of you here used generative AI before?
There's an app
Mhm.
that does dream interpretation according, like, based on your new psychoanalysis. And I love my dreams in there. And then you also will include, like, any associations you had with the dream and feelings you have, and then it generates an AI interpretation of it.
Interesting.
And it was quite impressive. However, I mean, it sounds great, it's well written.
Mm-hmm.
What I noticed though was that there wasn't a sense of like mental flexibility. Once I'd done it and included a certain number of dreams, let's say it was 10 dreams, it was like, oh, this is a cookie cutter response. There
Yeah.
wasn't, although it was still pretty brilliant, what it was pointing out was I felt like I could predict how it was going
Yeah.
to react. But it took a while.
Mhm.
And I could see why something like that would be helpful if you were then to take it to an actual human and maybe discuss it as a starting off point.
Yeah. Has anyone here noticed people sharing AI generated material on social media or anywhere else?
With jokes.
Yeah. My mom does it a lot, and I don't know if she knows, but it's usually things like she shared a AI generated video of like a cat cooking. So it's like generally harmless things. But I'm like curious and keep meaning to ask her like if she knows. And any other examples of what you've noticed people sharing?
Well, I think that question that I have is you're identifying methods like when you have a
Mhm.
text, but you can pick out obvious discrepancies.
Yeah.
There are ways of telling. And also with images, the thing with images that because people can get hung up on counting fingers and things like that.
Sure.
As a means of identifying where something might have been constructed
Mhm.
from, or obvious signs as it's just made up. But these LLMs, I think they all are drawing from vast amounts of data or examples they can
Yeah.
pull from. But there isn't a human mind or any morality behind what gets constructed. You're giving the machine a command to bring back something, an answer or an image to construct.
Mm-hmm.
And the computers don't get into the business of saying, well, where does this come from?
Yeah.
Is it right? Should we be doing it? It's answering the question. It's obeying the command.
Yeah.
So I think that what is also very dangerous for our society is the fact that images, for example, the way things are selected, they reflect the biases and
Yes.
stereotypes of individuals that have been involved in amassing the data, from different
Mhm.
sources. So it's already been noted that if people use AI to populate materials, give me an example of what a criminal looks like. Or how should a woman look when she's in business casual? What will she look like poolside? And you'll get all
Yeah.
kinds of strange things that don't necessarily reflect
Yeah.
real life and actually are biased against whole groups.
Yeah.
So I think that's a very dangerous thing.
Yeah. And there aren't really any bumpers on that or real protections on any scale against those biases bleeding into AI increasingly. And as the language learning models and all of that kind of expand what they're getting, they're just getting all of the biases of the material, and that's what they're reproducing and echoing, and it's not great. Do any of you have thoughts on like how you might be able to use the SIFT method other than with generative AI?
Pretty much with anything you like to research,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, exactly.
To make sure you just go those extra steps
Mhm.
to really verify what it is.
And what do you all think of AI overall?
I don't like it.
Yeah.
We have an AI hater.
Yeah.
But also it's like really terrible for the environment.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Love it.
But I also didn't have like I didn't have like any concept of like a structured way to like identify
Mhm.
to solve that. So it's like they have a
Yeah.
method to figure
Yeah.
out how to
Never spoken with someone who had that yet, right? Like, kind
yeah,
of
more friends.
Yeah.
I don't know, I'm a writer,
Mhm.
and I also taught writing for many, many years. And I no longer do that at undergraduate or university level. But I've seen the way it can cut down on some of the menial labor that you have to do as a writer, like organizing thoughts
Mhm.
or ideas, that kind of thing. For me, back when I was working on a novel, I'd be like, I wish I could have just plugged all that into AI, like ChatGPT or whatever, seen what it came up with, and then I could have corrected it, but at least that awful
Yeah.
part of doing that first draft would have been done, and I can take it from there
Mhm.
and make it sound good. So that, for me, is part of the ethical dilemma, is I want to outsource this labor, mental labor, what am I going to replace my time with, right? So like to make sure that I'm using that time not to then go scroll TikTok or whatever, but that I'm using it in meaningful ways.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to hate it, but I also think that for some uses, like in hospital settings where
Yeah.
you get those things going around, being like, oh, you have, right, and they can scan you and come up with a diagnosis like that, it can be life-saving in a lot of ways. And I know environmentally, it's one of many things that's raping the environment. And what are we going to prioritize? Is it going to be AI or is it going to be fast fashion? Everything we're doing is destroying the earth. I don't know. I think it's a really complicated question because in the end, like overall, as an undergraduate way back when, I studied religion, and there was a book called The Essence of Christianity by Ludwig Feuerbach, who basically argued that our ideas of God as all benevolent, all powerful, all this, all omniscient, are embody or reflect what all of humanity is capable of and has been capable of. No one person, but everybody who has ever been born and will ever be born, like that is what, like on to whenever, like the human race. So that idea, let's say, of omniscience is, and I think about AI as part of that somehow. That it's almost like we have to go here as a species because we have this idea already inherent in our thinking as seen in religion, Christianity. And I'm kind of a
Yeah.
psychologist, philosopher.
To me, I think there's the scale is kind of one of the questions with that, like with the environmental aspect of it, where the direction of the scale is not sustainable, and the ethics. Me personally, that's kind of where my thinking with it goes, and like seeing a lot of value for like the medical purposes that not so much. I mean, so talked about how non-generative AI has all been used for that for a long time at this point, but the scale of that is very different than the direction that generative AI has taken and is on a trajectory to continue in any case.
What about those, so I'm thinking about, as a writing teacher, having to read every word in a student undergraduate paper. Hundreds of pages every semester, every single semester for decades. Versus a chemistry professor who can give a multiple choice test and is like, you can run that through a computer and it's graded. So labor-wise, if I could turn over all that grading to an AI machine, yes, please, because then maybe you'll level the playing field between me and the chemistry professor who's already getting paid more than I am as a humanities professor anyway. So
I'd rather value the humanity more and pay you for what is important, which is like your intellect and like you being a professor in the humanities.
but then I should have like 5 students in my writing
Right,
classes,
like you
not
should.
25 or 30.
Yeah, there should be more professors of English or humanities, and you should be compensated more because just because it doesn't look like STEM labor doesn't mean it's not as valuable. They should be able to give you the tools that you need to do what you want to do in a good way, not expect them to do all that nonsense. That's not sustainable,
But that, yes, amen. However, we're living in a world where humanity like ethical questions that I don't necessarily know the
Yeah.
answer to, but as a human being who's pretty incensed about that chemistry teacher, like, I would absolutely want to use AI to do my work.
Yeah.
Because why not? That chemistry professor is going off and having fun or doing whatever, and I'm sitting there grading until 9 o'clock in the morning every day.
Yeah.
Anyway.
We'll continue to experience it and think about it, but
As far as the medical use of AI, what I
Mhm.
ran into the other day at a Brigham's hospital, went to a primary care first appointment, just an appointment, and she was very young, easy, not that that matters. Maybe that has more to do with me being 50 and recognizing life as it doesn't like her age at all. But, so that's my own bias, I acknowledge. But she asked me to use my permission to use AI that would translate our transcript. And I have never felt so dismissed in my entire life in a basic appointment.
My PCP, who's older than me, did the same thing.
Yeah, how did you feel? I mean, I don't know if it was just the environment. I mean, some of it could have been my day, but I went in pretty, so I couldn't figure out if it was her trying to utilize the AI generation, because I'm not sure how that works on
It's
the
like,
computer, but
it's
she
like
wouldn't respond
spoken
to me.
software,
Yeah.
so it's
Yeah,
like
so she
back in the
wouldn't-
day, there was Dragon, Natural.
Dragging me up.
And they still use, I'm about to start my first job as a doctor in June, and a bunch of the clinics especially are using AI to like transcribe your visits, but it's kind of,
But she couldn't say anything because then it would have triggered AI. Was I right about that?
yeah, I honestly don't know because I haven't had it in clinic yet, they just added it to the place where I'm leaving, so, but it's kind of tough because how can you actually consent to that being used if it's not, you know, if you don't really understand how it is, and it would be kind of
I
better
would
to
never
just
say yes again.
hire a scribe.
It's
instead.
basically a recording device.
But she just
Yeah.
she wouldn't interact with me. She wouldn't speak with me, whereas like the other girl that I've seen, and this is just like really basic stuff, would have like a little conversation, but I felt like she was gonna trigger the dragon or the AI, whatever that mechanism. It was a very uncomfortable conversation, but maybe it was her, but it didn't it changed once she said, I'm gonna use AI, can I do it? So that's my first experience. It could have totally been my perception and, a whole bunch of other things going in, but it just was a person
That's
taking care of my body.
weird.
I don't want.
No, yeah.
The AI. I want the experience, and they feel like they can say what they want to say.
Yeah.
Well, I wonder if in that case too, and I don't know, if it's actually a misuse of the term AI, like they're calling it AI, but really it's more of the recording or the
It's like, yeah, it depends on the place, but if they
That
say
is
it's AI,
generative.
then it's AI, it's like helps write the note, or it's using AI software to help like write the note. Sometimes there's another type of software where you can talk into it and
Yes.
it's dictation.
Yes.
But this new one that they're using in patient appointments is,
Generative.
yeah, so, which is kind of.
It was weird to read too.
Yeah, and I don't know like what software that was, but it's, yeah, so it's
Okay.
being introduced in various places, which I
It was my first time hearing about it, and it was.
I haven't been in, used it ever.
I don't really care. I think the medical system, I hope you can revolutionize it.
Working on it.
I think healthcare as it is
Just a big factory.
well, and compute, like, you can actually look at I look at my patient notes, and they're not accurate.
Yeah.
There was one I was like, oh, when did I have this? But I just don't take it personally anymore. I mean, as long as nobody's like operating on that thing that I never had, or nobody ever told me I had, it's like, okay. Nobody's really reading it or paying attention to it, except us.
Yeah.
And if we don't take it seriously, then
Yeah, well, there's some stuff I want. I just didn't like being in the physical space with the person who's depending on that.
Yeah.
I want to do another appointment. I am going to do AI because I want to test it out now. I should go out.
So-
3-month follow-up.
Well, thanks for coming, everyone.
thank you.
Yeah.